Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Sahabuddin Ahamed, Assistant Professor in the Department of English at Pandit Sundarlal Sharma Open University, Chhattisgarh, India. Welcome you all to this virtual lecture. Today, I will be presenting the topic Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Historical and Colonial Context. This presentation explores Joseph Conrad's novella Heart of Darkness as a product of imperial modernity. This presentation explores how historical realities, that is the colonization of the Congo Free State, shape the novella's themes, characters and narrative structure. In particular, this presentation focuses on European imperialism, the Congo Free State in Africa, the ideological foundation of imperial domination during the late 19th century. By situating the novel in its historical and colonial context, we can better understand Joseph Conrad's critique of imperial ideology and the moral implications of colonial domination. To begin with, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness was first published in 1899 in Blackwood's magazine. Heart of Darkness cannot be understood without situating within the historical context, within the historical realities of European imperialism in the late 19th century. Moreover, the novel emerges at a moment when imperialism had reached its height. Yet the novel was increasingly marked by many contradictions. While empire was publicly justified through the ideals of progress, civilization and humanitarianism, empire simultaneously relied on systemic violence, economic exploitation and racial hierarchies. The novella is structured as a frame narrative where an unnamed narrator listens to Charlie Marlowe, who recounts his journey into the African interior, that is the Congo Free State. Importantly, this frame narrative structure allows Joseph Conrad to present imperialism as a story. Imperialism must be interpreted, imperialism must be questioned rather than accepted as absolute truth. The novel questions the moral, political, and psychological consequences of late 19th century European imperialism in the Congo Free State. Rather than functioning as a purely symbolic or psychological narrative, the novella is deeply embedded in the material, political, and ideological structures of colonial expansion. Consequently, the novel is an ethical inquiry into colonial power, European subjectivity, and the violence underlying European imperial expansion. Now, turning to the next slide, Joseph Conrad's personal experience. It is important to note that Joseph Conrad lived during the height of European imperialism in the late 19th century. Conrad lived sixth month in the Congo Free State. Conrad was employed as a riverboat captain for a Belgian trading company in the Congo in 1890s. Moreover, his journey affected his health due to dysentery and malaria. He recorded his impressions of the Congo Free State in his Congo diary, and his personal experiences of the Congo Free State significantly shaped his novella Heart of Darkness. Initially, Joseph Conrad was supportive of imperial ideals, but later he became deeply disturbed when He witnessed brutality, corruption, inefficiency of imperial rule in the Congo Free State. His letters and later reflections reveal deep psychological distress that results from his personal experiences. What he witnessed, realized from his journey to the Congo Free State. Consequently, Heart of Darkness is not merely fictional, but Heart of Darkness is deeply rooted in personal experiences and critical observation of colonial practices and the consequences of colonial practices and the emotional trauma. Proceeding to the next slide, historical background of European imperialism in Africa. Imperialism in the 19th century must be understood as a comprehensive system. It encompasses economic, political, and cultural dimensions. Economically, empire functioned as a mechanism of extraction. It supplies European industries with raw materials such as rubber, ivory, and minerals, cheap labor. Politically, empire involved the imposition of foreign rule through military force, bureaucratic administration, and cultural domination, cultural superiority, dominant cultural ideology. Culturally, imperialism depended on ideologies that framed domination as natural, necessary, and beneficial. So, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness engages with all three dimensions, that is, economic, political, and cultural. In the novella, the Belgian trading company Marlowe Works, this company represents capitalist extraction, while colonial administration appears as inefficient and violently authoritative because its only aim is to exploit and extract resources and native people equally. So during the late 19th century, Africa had been colonized and imperialism was accepted within Europe as morally justified. It is inevitable in European mind. More importantly, 19th century was characterized by confidence in technological progress and administrative rationality. Besides, it was also characterized by anxiety about the ethical cost of empire. The late 19th century witnessed increasing reports of colonial atrocities, particularly in the Congo Free State. Consequently, imperial rhetoric of benevolence, progress, modernity began to clash with evidence of brutality, violence, mass killing. So, imperial rhetoric leads to the crisis of liberal humanist values. By this time, that is during the 19th century, European nations expanded beyond their national borders. This expansion was driven by industrial demands for raw materials, economic profit, cheap labor, and market political rivalry. Imperialism became a defining feature of European identity and power because European identity, power, and economy dependent on the colonies. Therefore, the novella reflects a historical moment in which European moral certainty was destabilized. Now, next slide, The scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa was motivated by three C's of, that is Christianity, civilization and commerce. The scramble for Africa refers to the rapid and violent colonization of African territories by European powers. It was done between 1880s and early 20th century. This process was formalized during the Berlin Conference that was held in 1884, where European nations divided Africa without African representations or voices. As a result, artificial borders were created, imposed. It leads to long-term political and social instability. So it was a reality that forms the backdrop of Joseph Conrad's novella. So as a result, indigenous political systems were dismantled, land was appropriated, populations were dehumanized, subjugated, they were forced to, they became enslaved. Heart of Darkness reflects the aftermath of this process. The chaotic colonial situations depicted in the novella. The novella demonstrates how the imperial administration failed in practice despite its claims to rational governance, despite its claims to bring about change, bring about colonial education, civilization, progress, modernity. Now in this slide, the Congo Free State was uniquely brutal because the Congo Free State was the personal property of King Leopold of Belgium. Under King Leopold, under King Leopold's rule, the extraction of ivory and rubber relied on forced labor, torture, mutilation and mass killings. Millions of Congolese people died as a result of these policies because when Congolese failed to collect ivory, they received severe punishment, that is mutilation and mass killings. Although these atrocities were initially concealed, international exposure gradually revealed the scale of violence done by the Belgian trading company. Economic accumulation was inseparable from terror. It reveals the inherent brutality of imperial rule. It is unchecked and examined by accountability. So Conrad's depiction of the Congo Free State closely parallels these historical realities because what happened under King Leopold's rule and in the novel what happened under Mr. Cood's rule in the Congo Free State. Although Joseph Conrad avoids explicit documentation, but the atmosphere of brutality, decay, moral emptiness reflects the true conditions of Leopold's regime. Therefore, Heart of Darkness functions as an indirect historical testimony to colonial terror. Turning to the next slide, imperialism as a civilizing mission. European imperialism was justified through the ideology of the civilizing mission. What is civilizing mission? Civilizing mission claimed that colonization can bring about progress, education, morality to inferior societies and people. This rhetoric drew heavily on European Enlightenment concept of region and universal human development. Conrad exposes the emptiness, hypocrisy of these civilizing ideals because instead of civilization, imperialism produced violence, brutality, exploitation, oppression, suppression, dehumanization, subjugation, and moral decay. The European characters in the novella repeatedly invoke noble ideals, but their actions reveal greed, lust, indifference, and cruelty. Consequently, the civilizing mission appears as a narrative designed to consequently the civilizing mission appears as a narrative designed to legitimate domination rather than a genuine ethical endeavor. The novel thus dismantles the imperial ideology, imperial myth by revealing its internal contradiction, its moral decay, spiritual emptiness. Now, next slide, focusing on the representation of Africa and Africans. In the novella, Africa is portrayed as both a physical and symbolic space, and also in European minds, Africa is a continent of darkness, emptiness. So, darkness represents the unknown and the moral decay of imperialism. This portrayal has generated critical debate regarding racial representation because of the representation of Africa as dark, inferior, savage, brute. Importantly, this representation does not necessarily reflect African societies, but rather European ignorance and alienation. Conrad's Africa is therefore less about Africa, and Conrad's Africa is more about how empire imagines the colonized world. This discursive construction plays a crucial role in maintaining imperial power because it justifies domination by depicting the colonized people as primitive, savage, brute, culturally other. While Joseph Conrad's critiquing European attitude, the narrative nonetheless reflects the racial hierarchies embedded within colonial discourse. African characters in the novel are often denied individuality, they are denied voice, representation, and they are described from a single Eurocentric perspective. That's why the critics argue that the text reinforces stereotypes. While Conrad may be critiquing European attitudes, the narrative nonetheless reflects the racial hierarchies embedded within colonial discourse. African characters in the novel are often denied individuality and voice. They are described from a single Eurocentric perspective. Consequently, many critics argue that the novel reinforces stereotypes. Africans are referred to as savage, cannibals, nigger, and primitive. They are rendered as culturally and racially other to European colonizers. However, others suggest that Joseph Conrad critiques European attitude rather than endorsing them. The silence of African characters illustrates how colonial power operates through dominant representational control. Speech, narration, and interpretation remain European privilege. That means it is the unequal, uneven cultural representation from Eurocentric perspective Therefore, the text reveals both the violence of empire and the limits of European representation, European self-critique. Now turning to the slide, Mr. Couch as a colonial figure. Mr. Couch is the agent for Belgian Trading Company in the Congo Free State. Couch represents the ultimate outcome of unchecked imperial power. He embodies unchecked absolute authority. Initially, Mr. Couch is driven by noble ideals. Later, he becomes consumed by greed, lust, dominance, and cruelty. Couch's famous declaration, exterminate all the brutes. So, this encapsulates the genocidal potential of imperial logic because he thinks that the native Africans are savage, they are brutes, and Africa needs European civilizational ideals, progress, modernity. When the colonized are reduced to abstraction, violence becomes rationalized. So, such violence rationalized through the character Mr. Couch. Mr. Couch is not an anomaly, but Mr. Couch is the outcome of a colonial system that equates power with moral emptiness. Thus, his moral collapse demonstrates that imperialism does not civilize but rather dismantles ethical judgment, ethical boundaries. Imperialism does not civilize, it dismantles ethical judgment and boundaries. It leads to moral decay, moral corruption within individual. So with this in mind, moving ahead, Belgian colonial violence. Historically, 10 million Africans died under King Leopold reign in the Congo Free State. The Belgian officers and company troops punished the Congolese by chopping off their limbs when Congolese African natives failed to collect rubber ivory. In the novel, the European character Mr. Couch performed this. In this novel, the European colonizer Mr. Couch performed this moral depravity. In this novel, the European character, European colonizer Mr. Couch performed this inhuman because of his lack of moral control, moral restraint, because of his depravity that leads him to unlimited power, absolute authority. During his conversation with the Russian, Marlowe comes to know the ornamental. During his conversation with the Russian, Marlowe experiences the ornamental balls, that is human heads, around Mr. Couch's heart. Actually, the human heads are nothing but the human heads of those rebels who wanted to resist Mr. Couch, who refused to collect ivory for Mr. Couch for the Belgian company. And that's why Mr. Couch ordered to shoot them, to kill them, and it is the warning for the native Africans. So in this way, Mr. Couch shows his depravity, megalomania, and lack of moral restraint. And he is the epitome of Belgian colonial violence. So in this way, there is a parallel between the Belgian colonial violence and Mr. Couch's activities in the Congo Free State. Now at this stage, turning to the critique of European colonialism. Rather than portraying Africa as an inherently dark, Joseph Conrad suggests that darkness resides within European civilization, European colonizers itself. The novel challenges the assumption about cultural superiority because it challenges the representation of Africa by Europeans, and it reveals that darkness lies within European civilization itself. Thus, the novel reverses the traditional colonial assumptions about Africa and Africans. Next, the historical significance of the novel. Despite many controversies, Heart of Darkness remains historically significant because the novel captures the psychological and moral consequences of European imperialism. The novel exposes colonial violence, cruelty. The novel has influenced later writers, and the novel continues to shape discussions of empire and ethics. Furthermore, the novel provides valuable insight into European colonial attitudes at the turn of the century. To conclude, Conrad's Heart of Darkness must be read as a historically grounded exploration of imperialism's moral contradiction. By situating the novel within the context of colonial Africa, we uncover the novel's engagement with violence, ideology, and power. Through its critique of imperial ideology, the novel exposes the moral and psychological consequences of colonial domination. Therefore, the novel continues to hold significant historical values, academic values. The novel continues to provoke many critical debate. Hence, the novel's relevance persists within historical, literary, cultural studies. Now, in this slide, further reading. For a deeper understanding of the historical and colonial context of the novel, the following historical and critical texts are recommended. Now, dear learners, I have completed the topic Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Historical and Colonial Context. I hope this presentation is fruitful. It has provided useful insights in the topic, and all of you have understood the topic, and I welcome any questions, comments from you. And that's all for today's session. We'll meet again soon with another video. Thank you for watching and engaging.